Hi. So our group is having a presentation on the pros and cons of nuclear energy, and my group consists of Evan, Utkarsh, and myself, Danilo. So we're going to be pretty much assessing nuclear energy, the controversial aspects of it, and all the negative and positive points that come with it. So, for example, some of the positive points would be that nuclear energy is a really good alternative energy to basically coal and fossil fuels, since it's less harming for the environment. While some of the negative aspects would be that, uh, well, it could be used for war, pretty much, for weapons, and that can also harm the environment if it's stored in places that can get destroyed due to natural disasters. So basically, as you can see, nuclear energy is a very controversial topic, which raises a lot of questions about its effects on the environment and human life in general. And due to the weapons that were used in the world wars that passed, nuclear energy has been regarded as really one of the most more scary sources of energy. But actually, there's a lot of good uses for nuclear energy, and it's a lot more clean to use. As you can see on the next slide, the pros to nuclear energy include many benefits that can contribute to a greener Earth, such as low emissions of greenhouse gases and a smaller footprint. Basically, what that means, by smaller footprint, I mean it takes a lot less space, a lot less landscape to be able to have a nuclear plant. Whereas you're going to need a lot more space to have a lot of windmills for wind power, or mine shaft. You're going to be destroying most of the earth for mining and for getting the oil out of the ground. So nuclear energy has a lot smaller footprint. But the best part about nuclear energy, the best pro about it, is that it has really low greenhouse gas emissions. As you can see by this table right here, this chart, uh, nuclear energy is actually better than solar energy and biomass included. So that would mean we've been using solar panels, which actually take up a lot of space in the land, and we really thought that's a really good way of removing the greenhouse gas emissions and polluting the air a little less. But nuclear energy is actually a better alternative to that, as you can see by those numbers right there. And now uh, for the footprint, you can see here that the windmills and the solar panels, they take up a lot of land. That means a really large human footprint on Earth, which of course alters the environment. One nuclear power plant produces 1,000 megawatts per hour, and you would need 60,000 acres of land for windmills to generate that same amount of power, whereas you would need 5,000 acres with solar panels to generate that amount of power. Whereas a nuclear power plant only takes about 1,000 to 3,000 acres, which means a lot smaller of a footprint.
I am Evan Rube, and I will be talking about the cons of nuclear energy. Because of the strengths mentioned earlier, nuclear energy has seen relatively large widespread adoption, with 13.8% of the world's total energy being generated by nuclear energy in 2007. It hasn't, however, come close to being the complete replacement for fossil fuels the world so desperately needs. This is because, like any technology, nuclear energy has many consequences associated with its use. Here, I'm going to talk about two of the main problems slowing down the adoption of nuclear energy: the risk of dangerous accidents occurring within nuclear energy plants, and the disposal of the highly radioactive waste that nuclear energy produces. For each problem, a potential solution will also be discussed. The possibility of a nuclear power plant undergoing a catastrophic accident has been at the forefront of the public's mind ever since the Chernobyl disaster of 1986. The image of a nuclear plant spontaneously exploding, launching large amounts of radioactive materials high into the atmosphere and causing widespread evacuations has been inextricably tied to nuclear energy for decades, reducing the rate of adoption. These fears are by no means unfounded, as smaller scale nuclear accidents have been occurring ever since, the most notable one recently being the 2011 in Fukushima, Japan. Nuclear accidents are relatively rare, but they can have disastrous consequences. The radioactive fallout from the Chernobyl explosion, for example, caused over 4,000 possible cancer cases, while the Fukushima accident caused enormous amounts of radioactive material to be released into the waters of Japan. It is noteworthy, however, that these two events were two of the worst in history, and that the main cause of nuclear accidents is no longer spontaneous explosions like the Chernobyl. Most modern nuclear events happen in the same way as in the Fukushima disaster, where damage from natural disaster are what caused the safety features of the plant to fail. In order to prevent future disasters, new regulations and guidelines for the construction of nuclear power plants are always being created based off the lessons learned from previous failures. One example of this is the new set of guidelines created by the Nuclear Energy Agency, or NEA, an intergovernmental organization dedicated to setting guidelines for safe nuclear plants. It oversees the implementation of nuclear energy in 35 of the most developed nations. This newest set of recommendations was published in 2016 and provides a series of suggestions based on the Fukushima disaster 6 years ago. Noteworthy inclusions include reinforcing flood prevention. Anytime.
Hi, my name is Utkarsh, and just continuing along the lines of the cons of nuclear energy, we're going to talk about some of the radioactive waste that the energy generates. Well, the biggest problem with radioactive waste that comes out of nuclear power stations is that it takes millions of years for it to disintegrate. Now, that is a problem because we need to find safe spots, which are very few on this planet, to store that hazardous waste that comes out of the nuclear power plants. Well, normally what they do is they are put in the salt mines, which are very old and are no longer in use, or they are stored in in-house facilities like these ones, and then they can be stored in salt mines. One of the most efficient ways to deal with nuclear waste has been dealing with geological and burying the entire waste underground. So, moving on. More governmental commitment is a key, and it's must for a safe nuclear future. It's a very promising technology, but unfortunately, irresponsible handling of the radioactive waste causes it to have a bad reputation. For example, USA's Yucca Mountain Nuclear Waste Repository is one of the best in the world. This project was shut down, well, because the government failed to commit itself for long-term initiatives in the long run. Here at Lausanne, one of the professors has been researching on how to store the nuclear waste in better geological repositories across Canada, and only a handful of locations across US and Canada have been flagged down by the government. So the final conclusion of the entire presentation will be that there is a low possibility of major accidents, as my friend Evan mentioned, because of failures inherently of the nuclear plants. It's primarily because of the nuclear disasters. It's one of the most green sources of energy, although it does generate radioactive waste. And unfortunately, that's one of its bad sides, but if we handle that particular segment of it well, it can actually be one of the most promising technologies to be used for power generations for the future, especially in these times of climate change. Nuclear energy can be handled through various improvements in safety regulations, and it needs a very strong government commitment for its continuation along the lines. And it is actually one of the most promising ways to replace fossil fuels in a very, very short-term and long-term period. Going on to the final references, these are some of the references that we have used in compiling this entire information. Our entire conclusion out of this presentation is that the nuclear energy has a very sustainable and thriving future as long as we are able to commit ourselves to managing the radioactive waste that the energy is generating and maintaining more safety standards across the industry. So we hope you enjoy the presentation, and thank you very much.